Hey, Tere, and welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. This little corner where darkness softens, and stories breathe quietly in the background. Before we drift into tonight's tale, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if what you hear truly feels right for you. Your comfort matters more than anything else. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time the night found you. I love seeing how our growing community gathers from so many different places. It's a reminder that even in silence, we're connected. I hope you'll allow this video to accompany you for a while. Every story here is shaped to ease your thoughts, soothe your mind, and guide you gently into the late hours with a touch of mystery and calm. So go ahead, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day melt away. And now, let's step into tonight's story together. The forest was silent in a way that felt unnatural. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a winter night. It was watchful, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Adam had lived near this forest his entire life. He knew its paths, its sounds, all its hidden dangers. He'd explored every inch of it since he was a kid. But this particular night, something felt wrong. The cold was sharper. The silence was louder. Fresh snow had fallen earlier that evening. A perfect, untouched blanket covering the ground. There was no wind. No animals stirring. Just an absolute, unnerving stillness. It was just after midnight when Adam decided to go for a short walk. He told himself he'd only be a few minutes, just to clear his head. The cold air burned his lungs as he stepped onto the narrow trail leading into the trees. His boots, the first to disturb the pristine snow. He walked deeper and deeper. The familiar crunch of his steps, the only sound in the vast quiet. The moon was bright, casting long, distorted shadows from the skeletal branches of the trees. He felt a strange sense of being watched, a prickling on the back of his neck that he tried to ignore. He was just being paranoid, he thought. It was the cold playing tricks on his mind. After what felt like an hour, maybe more, he realized something was terribly wrong. He could no longer hear his own footsteps. The snow beneath his heavy winter boots made no sound at all. It was as if he was floating, gliding over the surface. He stopped, confused, and listened. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence. And that's when he looked down. His footprints were there, clear as day, pressed deep into the fresh powder. But beside them were others. Another set of tracks, running parallel to his own. They were larger, deeper, and they walked in perfect, impossible sync with his. Every step he had taken, this other thing had taken one too. Adam's blood ran cold. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stopped walking. The second set of footprints stopped too, right beside his. He stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Who could be out here? Why were they walking so close to him, mimicking his every move without making a sound? He slowly, cautiously, took a single step forward. A new footprint appeared beside his. He took a step back. Another footprint appeared in reverse, still perfectly aligned. A wave of pure terror washed over him. He wasn't alone. He whipped his head around, scanning the moonlit trees, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. There was nothing, just the dark, silent woods. He was completely, utterly alone. But the tracks in the snow told a different story. He started walking again, faster this time, his eyes glued to the ground. The second set of footprints kept pace, a silent, menacing shadow at his side. He broke into a run, his lungs screaming for air, his feet slipping in the deep snow. The other footprints ran with him. He didn't know how long he ran, or in what direction. He was lost, disoriented, driven by pure, primal fear. He just needed to get away from his invisible companion. Finally, exhausted and terrified, he stumbled to a halt in a small clearing. He risked a glance behind him. Nothing. He looked down. The two sets of footprints were still there, ending exactly where he stood. He was trapped. The search teams arrived the next morning. The missing person report had come from Adam's worried family when he didn't return home. They found his tracks easily, starting from the edge of the forest. And right away, they noticed the second set. 2 sets of footprints, side by side, one belonging to a man in winter boots, the other much larger, almost in. The experienced trackers followed the trail deep into the heart of the forest. They called out Adam's name, their voices swallowed by the dense woods. They followed the prints for miles. They saw where he had stopped, where he had started running. The frantic, desperate pace etched into the snow. The 2 sets of tracks never wavered, never separated. They continued on, step for step, stride for stride. And then, in the middle of a wide, open clearing, the footprints just ended. There was no sign of a struggle. No scuffed snow, no blood. No sign that Adam had turned back or changed direction. It was as if he, and whatever was walking with him, had simply been lifted straight up into the sky. One moment, there were 2 sets of prints. The next, there was nothing but smooth, undisturbed snow stretching out ahead. Adam was never seen again. His disappearance became one of the town's darkest legends, a cautionary tale whispered on cold winter nights. To this day, no one knows what happened to him, or what made those second set of footprints in the snow. But some locals say that every winter, when the first heavy snow falls and blankets the forest in silence, 2 new sets of footprints appear on that old trail. One small, one large, waiting patiently, side by side, for someone else to come and walk with them. Maria had been driving for what felt like an eternity, the endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing under her tires. That's when the first snowflakes began to fall. Not the gentle, picturesque kind you see in movies, but a sudden, violent blizzard that seemed to erupt from the sky itself. Within minutes, the road was gone, buried beneath a treacherous sheet of white. The dense, dark forest on either side pressed in, swallowing everything beyond the weak beam of her headlights. Then, with a final, sputtering cough, her car stalled. Dead. She tried her phone, her thumb numb with cold as she stabbed at the screen. No signia. Of course, a chilling sense of isolation began to creep in, far colder than the storm raging outside. Panic, cold and sharp, was beginning to rise in her throat, as the temperature inside the car plummeted and the cold started to seep deep into her bones. A faint glimmer of hope appeared through the swirling snow. A light. Squinting, she saw it. Tucked just off the road, nestled among the ancient, snow-laden trees, was a cabin. It was made of old, dark wood, the kind that looked like it had stood there for 100 years. A dim, warm light glowed from a window, and a thin ribbon of smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, a silent promise of warmth. In that moment, she didn't question it. She didn't wonder who it belonged to or why it was there, in the middle of nowhere. All she felt was a primal need for shelter. Shoving her car door open against the wind, she ran. The heavy wooden door creaked open under her touch. The moment she stepped inside, a wave of warmth washed over her, a stark contrast to the biting cold she'd just escaped. A fire was burning quietly in a large stone fireplace, its flames dancing and casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. On a small, rustic table in the center of the room, a single cup of tea sat steaming, as if waiting just for her. It was clear someone had been here only moments before. But the cabin was silent, empty. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion, heavier than the snow outside, suddenly pulled at her. She barely registered sinking into a plush armchair by the fire before the world dissolved into darkness. When Maria woke, it was with a gasp. The first thing she felt was the intense, biting cold. She was lying in a drift of fresh snow, the morning sun glinting off its surface, almost blinding her. She sat up, her body aching. The storm had passed. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. She looked around, confused, her heart starting to pound in her chest. The cabin was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. No scorched earth from the fireplace. No foundation, not even a single disturbed patch of ground. The only footprints in the vast, unbroken expanse of snow were her own. leading from the dead car on the road to the spot where she now sat. It was impossible. She frantically checked her pockets, her mind reeling, trying to grasp onto something real, something to prove she hadn't lost her mind. And that's when she found it. Tucked deep in her coat pocket, cold and heavy against her fingers, was a rusty iron key. Weeks went by, but the memory of the cabin haunted her every waking moment. The warmth, the tea, the impossible disappearance. She couldn't let it go. Finally, she convinced 2 skeptical police officers to accompany her back to the spot. She needed someone else to see it, to validate her experience. They drove down the same remote forest road, now clear and dry under the late autumn sun. The forest was calm, peaceful. There was nothing there. Maria felt a flush of embarrassment, the officers exchanging knowing glances. She was about to give up, to accept that maybe the cold had made her hallucinate, when one of the officers pointed. "What in the world is that?" he asked, his voice hushed. It was back. It was back. The cabin stood exactly where she remembered it, looking just as old and solid as before. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down Maria's spine. This time, they entered together, their boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. The inside was different. It was cold, empty, and covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been abandoned for decades. There was no fire, no table, no tea. It was just a hollow, forgotten shell. Except for one thing. On the dusty mantelpiece, above the cold fireplace, propped up against the stone, were photographs, old, sepia-toned pictures. Her blood ran cold as she stepped closer. The photographs were of her. One showed her sleeping in the armchair by the fire, her face peaceful. Another showed her standing outside, staring up at the cabin, just as she had done that first night. And the last one made her scream. It was a close-up of her own face, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a silent scream of pure terror, looking directly at the camera, as if she knew the photographer was there. The officers didn't need any more convincing. They backed out of the cabin slowly, their hands hovering over their holsters, and Tay left. They left immediately, almost running back to their patrol car. Maria glanced back over her shoulder just as they reached the road. The spot where the cabin had stood just moments before was now an empty clearing. It had vanished again. Maria still has the key. She keeps it locked away in a small box on her dresser. Most of the time, it's just a cold, inert piece of metal. A strange souvenir from a night she can barely believe happened. But sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, when the wind howls outside her window and the world is buried in snow, she feels a strange pull towards the box. And when she takes the key out, it's no longer cold. It's warm in her hand, glowing with a faint, impossible heat, as if the fire from that long-lost cabin is still burning somewhere, waiting for her to come back. Have you ever been deep in the woods, far from anyone, and heard something that just wasn't right? A sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Tonight's story is about that feeling. It's about a voice that everyone who walks the forest at night eventually hears. It's soft, familiar, and it knows your name. This story begins with Daniel. He was an experienced outdoorsman, someone who felt more at home under a canopy of leaves than under a roof. He loved the solitude, the crisp air, the raw beauty of nature. One winter, he decided to go on a solo camping trip. It was something he'd done dozens of times before. He chose a remote patch of forest, known for its ancient, towering pines and deep, undisturbed snow. He set up his tent, built a crackling fire, and settled in for a quiet night under the stars. The world was silent, muffled by a thick blanket of white. The only sounds were the hiss and pop of the fire and the gentle sigh of the wind through the high branches. As the moon climbed higher, casting long, eerie shadows across the snow, Daniel heard it for the first time, a whisper carried on the wind. He paused, straining his ears. It was so faint, he almost dismissed it as a trick of the air, the way the wind can sometimes sound like a voice. He shrugged it off and went back to watching the flames dance. But then it came again, clearer this time. Daniel, his head snapped up. It wasn't the wind. This was a voice, and it had said his name perfectly. It was a familiar voice, but he couldn't quite place it. It was like a memory, just out of reach. He scanned the dark wall of trees surrounding his small clearing. Nothing. No footprints in the snow, no sign of anyone else. He called out, "Hello. Is anyone there?" Only the silence answered him. He told himself he was just tired. The isolation was getting to him. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the warmth of his fire, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. The voice came a third time, closer now. Daniel, it seemed to emanate from just beyond the firelight, from the deep darkness between the trees. And this time, he recognized it. The shock was like a physical blow. The voice sounded exactly like his own. It was his voice, but not as he spoke it. It was his voice, as he heard it in his own head. The internal monologue that was his constant companion had somehow escaped, and was now calling to him from the shadows. Fear turned to a strange, compelling curiosity. Who was calling him? Or what? He knew he shouldn't. Every survival instinct screamed at him to stay by the fire, to wait until morning. But the pull was irresistible. It was his own voice. After all, how could he not follow it? He grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness, and took a tentative step into the forest. Daniel. The voice was ahead of him now, leading him deeper among the ancient pines. He followed, his boots crunching in the pristine snow. The air grew colder the farther he walked from his fire. The forest became a maze of black trunks and tangled branches. called out, "Where are you?" The only reply was that same soft whisper of his name, always just a little farther away. He walked for what felt like hours. The familiar clearing of his camp was long gone. He was lost, but the voice was his only guide, his only companion in the vast, silent woods. The strange thing was, the closer he thought he was getting to the source, the quieter the voice became. It was as if it was drawing him in, only to fade as he approached. The whisper grew softer and softer, until it was barely audible. Daniel. Then, the sound was no longer in front of him. He stopped, holding his breath, listening. A twig snapped to his left. He swung the flashlight beam, but saw nothing but trees and snow. Then he heard it again, a faint whisper right beside his ear. Daniel Espun aroned, his heart hammering against his ribs. Nothing. He was utterly alone. The air was still. Then, from directly behind him, so close he could almost feel a breath on his neck, the voice whispered his name one last time. Daniel froze. The flashlight slipped from his numb fingers and fell into the snow, its light pointing uselessly at the sky. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He just stood there, paralyzed by a terror so profound it stole the air from his lungs. The voice was gone. The forest was silent again, but the presence was still there. He could feel it. It wasn't behind him anymore. It was with him, around him, inside him. The search party found him the next morning. They followed his tracks from the abandoned campsite, a single set of footprints leading deep into the woods. They found him standing in a small, snow-covered clearing, a human statue frozen in place. His coat was covered in frost. His face was pale blue, but his eyes were wide open, staring at something none of them could see. His mouth was moving, forming silent words over and over. The doctors at the hospital said it was a miracle he was alive. Severe hypothermia, but his vital signs were stable. Physically, he would recover. But Daniel never spoke again. He never made a sound. He would just sit in his room, staring into space, his eyes holding a look of unspeakable horror. They said his mind was gone, lost to the cold, to the trauma. But sometimes, if you watch him closely, you can see his lips still move. Silently, shaping a word, as if he's trying to call out to someone, trying to lure them into the woods, as if he's whispering someone else's name. So, if you're ever walking in the forest at night, and you hear a soft, familiar voice calling your name, don't answer it. Don't follow it. Turn around, walk back the way you came, and don't stop until you see the light, because it might not be the wind. It might be Daniel or whatever is left of him. Have you ever felt a chill so deep it seems to freeze time itself? Not just the cold that bites at your skin, but a cold that reaches into the very fabric of reality. Imagine stumbling through a snow-covered forest, the silence broken only by the crunch of your boots. The air is still, heavy with unspoken secrets, and then you see it, a glint of metal, half buried in a drift of pristine white snow. You brush the powder away, and a vintage pocket watch emerges, its silver casing icy to the touch. It's beautiful, ornate, but there's something unsettling about it. You flip it open, the hands are frozen, stopped, pointing to exactly 3:17. It seems like just an old, broken trinket, a relic of a forgotten time. But this is no ordinary watch. Its story is woven into the very woods where it was found. A tale whispered on the winter winds. The first person to find it was a hiker named Leo, a man who prided himself on his knowledge of the local trails. Etuhat Ed found a treasure, something to show off back in town. He pocketed the watch and continued his journey, the weight of it a small, cold presence against his leg. That night, snug in his tent, he was woken by an unnatural stillness. He checked his own digital watch. It was 3:16 a.m. As the numbers flickered to 3:17, the world stopped. The gentle flutter of snow outside his tent froze midair, each flake suspended like a tiny star. The flame of his lantern became a solid, unmoving teardrop of light. He tried to draw a breath, but the air was trapped in his lungs, his chest a frozen cage. A silent scream built in his throat, but no sound could escape. The universe had been put on pause. He was trapped in a single, silent, terrifying moment for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes. He was a statue in a frozen world. Then, as suddenly as it began, time lurched forward again. The snow resumed its descent. The flame flickered, and the sound of the wind returned. But Leo was gone, vanished. The only thing left inside the empty tent was the pocket watch, lying on his sleeping bag, its hand still pointing to 3:17. News of his disappearance spread, and search parties combed the forest. They found his campsite, his gear, his footprints leading in, but none leading out. It was a mystery that baffled everyone. A few weeks later, a young woman, a local artist named Clara, was sketching the winter landscape when she found the watch, unaware of its connection to the missing hiker. She was captivated by its frozen beauty. She took it home, planning to use it as a subject for a new painting. Like Leo, she admired its craftsmanship, the intricate engravings on its case. That night, she placed it on her bedside table. At 3:16 a.m., she woke up, feeling a strange sense of dread. As her clock clicked over to 3:17, her world froze. Her charcoal pencils, scattered on a desk, hung in the air where they'd rolled. A glass of water she'd knocked over in her sudden awakening was a solid, suspended cascade. She was paralyzed, a prisoner in her own room, her mind racing with a terror that had no voice. She could see the moonlight filtering through her window, painting static patterns on the floor. Everything was utterly, completely still. And then, just as before, time resumed its flow. The water crashed to the floor. The pencils clattered onto the wood, but the room was empty. Clara was gone. The only thing left behind was the silver pocket watch, sitting on her nightstand, forever locked at 3:17. Two disappearances, both linked by this one object. The local authorities were stumped. They had the watch in their evidence locker. A cold, silent suspect. A detective, a skeptical man named Miller who had seen it all, decided to investigate it himself. He didn't believe in curses or supernatural phenomena. There had to be a logical explanation. Late one night, alone in his office, he took the watch from its evidence bag. He held it in his palm, feeling its unnatural coldness seep into his skin. He examined it under his desk lamp, looking for any mechanism, any trick. He checked his own watch. It was 3:15 a.m. He waited, a cynical smile on his face, ready to debunk the whole story. 3:16. He felt a strange pressure in the room, the air growing thick and heavy. He told himself it was just his imagination, the late hour playing tricks on him. 3:17. The low hum of his computer ceased. The blinking cursor on his screen stopped. A solid green line, the drip from a leaky faucet in the hallway, hung in space. Miller's smile was frozen on his face. His heart hammered against his ribs, but the sound was trapped inside him. He tried to move, to drop the watch, but his muscles wouldn't obey. He was a statue of disbelief, his eyes wide with a horror that defied all logic. The world had become a photograph, and he was trapped within it. A few minutes later, the office came back to life. The computer hummed, the cursor blinked, the water drop fell. But Detective Miller's chair was empty. The watch lay on his desk, a silent testament to a truth he could no longer deny. After 3 disappearances, the watch became the stuff of local legend. A cursed object, no one dared touch it. The police, unable to explain what happened, and unwilling to risk anyone else, made a decision. They took the watch deep into the forest, back to the same remote area where it was first discovered. They sealed it in a heavy, lead-lined box and buried it deep beneath the frozen ground, marking the spot with a simple, unadorned stone. They hoped that by returning it to its resting place, the curse would be contained. For years, it seemed to work. The disappearances stopped. The story of the frozen watch faded into folklore, a scary story told around campfires. But curses have a way of resurfacing. Time erodes all things, even the resolve to leave the past buried. Decades later, a group of college students, amateur paranormal investigators, heard the legend. They saw it as the ultimate challenge. Armed with ghost hunting gear and a healthy dose of youthful arrogance, they found the old records, pinpointed the location, and set out to find the buried watch. They found the stone marker, and after hours of digging in the cold earth, their shovels hit the lined box. With a sense of triumph, they pried it open. There it was, the silver pocket watch, untarnished by its time in the earth. One of them, the leader of the group, picked it up. He checked his phone. It was just after 3 a.m. "Let's see what this thing can really do," he said with a laugh. They set up their cameras, their audio recorders, ready to capture proof of the supernatural. At 3:16, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. The wind dieth. The nervous laughter of the students caught in their throats. At 3:17, the moment shattered. The digital displays on their cameras froze. The rustling of leaves stopped. The world held its breath. And in that silent, frozen tableau, one by one, they were subjected to the same horrifying paralysis. When time restarted, the forest was empty. The cameras were still running, but the recording showed nothing but a few minutes of static before the scene returned to normal, showing an empty clearing. All that remained was the open box, and beside it, the watch. The watch was never found again after that night. Or perhaps it was. Perhaps it's been found and lost countless times since, each discovery leading to another quiet, inexplicable vanishing. Some say the watch is a gateway, a key to a frozen moment that exists outside of our own timeline, a pocket dimension forever stuck at 3:17 a.m. on a cold winter's night. They say that everyone who has ever held it at that precise moment isn't gone. They're just there, trapped together in that silent, snow-filled forest, unable to move, unable to speak, forever living in the single second between one breath and the next. They are the statues in a frozen garden, waiting for a time that will never come. So if you're ever walking in the woods and you see a glint of silver in the snow, you might want to just keep walking, because some treasures are better left buried, some moments are better left in the past, and some hands of time should never, ever be touched. Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine on a quiet winter night? The kind of cold that has nothing to do with the temperature. Tonight's story is about that feeling. A story that will make you think twice before walking alone in the woods after dark. It's called The Child with No Footprints. Our story begins in a small, remote town nestled deep within a sprawling, ancient forest. This town was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where secrets were hard to keep. But the woods kept secrets of its own. Our protagonist, a woman named Elara, had lived there her whole life. She was a librarian, a woman who found comfort in the quiet rustle of pages and the scent of old books. She loved the forest, or at least, she thought she did. She'd spent her childhood playing among its towering trees, building forts from fallen branches, and pretending the whispering leaves were telling her ancient stories. But as she grew older, the forest began to feel different. The familiar paths seemed to twist in new ways, and the shadows seemed to deepen, holding something she couldn't quite name. The locals had their own tales, of course, stories whispered over warm mugs in the town's only tavern. They spoke of strange lights dancing between the trees, of sounds that mimicked human voices, and of people who went into the woods and never came out the same. Ilara had always dismissed them as folk tales. Campfire stories meant to scare children. She was a woman of logic, of facts, but some things she was about to learn defy all logic. One particular winter, the snow fell heavier than anyone could remember. It blanketed the town in a pristine, silent layer of white, muffling all sound and making the world feel small and isolated. The forest became a monochrome painting of black trunks and white ground. It was on one such night, with a full moon casting an eerie, blue-white glow over the landscape, that Ilara's world began to unravel. She was sitting by her window, a cup of cooling tea in her hands, watching the snow fall gently outside. Her cottage was at the very edge of the town, bordering the forest directly. It was a peaceful scene, almost too peaceful. Then she saw it, a movement at the edge of the woods, just beyond her garden fence. She squinted, her heart giving a little flutter. It was a figure, small, like a child. The child was just standing there, partially obscured by the thick trunks of the pine trees. They weren't wearing a proper winter coat, just a simple, dark-colored tunic that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Ilara's first thought was concern. What was a child doing out here, alone, in this cold? It had to be well below freezing. She watched, her brow furrowed, as the child raised a small hand and waved. A slow, deliberate wave. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, but the instinct to help was stronger. A child was in trouble. She pulled on her heavy boots, grabbed her thickest wool coat, and snatched a flashlight from the hook by the door. "I'm coming," she called out, though her voice was swallowed by the thick, snowy air. As she stepped outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow. The snow crunched loudly under her boots, the only sound in the dead-still night. She made her way to the fence, her flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. The child hadn't moved. They were still standing there, watching her approach. "Hello," Ilara called, her voice trembling slightly now. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" She climbed over the low fence and started walking into the forest, towards the child. The snow was deep here, untouched, a perfect, smooth blanket. As she got closer, she could see the child more clearly. It was a boy with dark, messy hair and large, dark eyes that seemed to reflect the moonlight. He had a strange, placid expression on his face. Not fear, not cold, just an unnerving calmness. But then, Ilara noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. She shone her flashlight down at the snow around the boy. It was perfect, undisturbed. There were no tracks leading to where he stood. No footprints at all. It was as if he had simply materialized out of the cold air. Her breath caught in her throat. The cold she felt now was deep in her bones. This wasn't right. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to turn back, to run, to lock her door, and pretend she'd never seen anything. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, held there by the boy's unwavering gaze. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, the words turning to vapor in the frigid air. The boy smiled. It wasn't a warm, childish smile. It was a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his dark, empty eyes. It held a sorrow that seemed ancient, far too old for such a young face. When he spoke, his voice was not the voice of a child. It was a chorus, a whisper of wind through pines, the crackle of ice on a frozen lake, and something else, ... Something familiar. "Don't you recognize me, Ilara?" the voice echoed. seeming to come from all around her rather than just from the boy. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. How did he know her name? She had never seen this child before in her life. I don't understand, she stammered, taking an involuntary step back. Her boot print was a deep, dark scar in the perfect snow. I am the part of you that never left, the boy said, his smile widening slightly. The part that stayed here, in the forest, all those years ago. A memory, long buried, flashed through Ilara's mind. A memory from her childhood, one she had suppressed for decades. She was 7 years old, playing hide-and-seek with her friends in this very forest. It was getting dark, and she had hidden herself so well, deep within a hollow log, that her friends eventually gave up and went home without her. She remembered the panic setting in as the woods grew dark and the familiar shapes of trees twisted into monstrous forms. She had been lost, terrified, crying for her parents. She remembered a feeling of absolute despair, a feeling that she would be stuck in the forest forever, that she would become another one of the town's ghost stories. Eventually, her father had found her, but something had changed that day. Her love for the forest had been replaced by a quiet, nagging fear. A fear she never spoke of. You remember, don't you? The child whispered, his voice a cold caress. You ran. You left me behind, but I've been waiting for you to come back. Then, as Ilara stared in horror, the boy began to fade. His form flickered like a dying candle flame, his edges blurring into the snowy darkness behind him. The smile was the last thing to go, a disembodied crescent hanging in the air for a moment before winking out of existence. He was gone. Silence descended once more, heavier and more menacing than before. Ilara stood frozen, her mind reeling, trying to process what she had just seen, what she had just heard. Was she going mad? Had the isolation of the winter finally gotten to her? She looked down at the snow. Where the boy had stood, it remained a perfect, unbroken sheet of white. But leading away from her, back towards her cottage, was her own set of footprints. And next to them was another set. Small, child-sized, heading in the same direction. Panic, cold, and absolute, finally broke through her paralysis. She turned and scrambled back towards the light of her cottage, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She didn't dare look behind her. She threw herself over the fence, stumbled to her door, fumbled with the lock, and slammed it shut behind her, leaning against it as her body shook uncontrollably. The next morning, the snow had stopped falling. The sun rose, casting long, blue shadows across the pristine landscape. A neighbor, concerned after not seeing any smoke from Ilara's chimney, decided to check on her. He called her name, but there was no answer. The front door was unlocked. When he stepped inside, the cottage was empty. A cup of tea sat cold on the windowsill. A heavy coat and a flashlight were missing from the hooks by the door. The neighbor followed a single set of footprints leading from Ilara's front door to the fence at the edge of the woods. Adult-sized footprints belonging to Ilara. They went over the fence and into the forest, and then they stopped. They just... ... ended a few yards in, but from that point on, where Ilara's tracks vanished into thin air, a new set of tracks began. Only one set. Small, child-sized, leading deeper and deeper into the silent, waiting forest. Ilara was never seen again. The town added her name to the long list of people claimed by the woods, and sometimes, on quiet winter nights, locals say that if you look closely at the edge of the forest, you can see two figures standing there, a woman and a small child, holding a hand, waiting. The forest was silent the night Elias brought his camera with him. Not the peaceful kind of silence you find deep in nature, but the kind that feels heavy, suffocating. It was as if sound itself was afraid to exist there. Elias was a professional wildlife photographer, a man who had dedicated his life to capturing the untamed beauty of the world. He had spent years in the most remote corners of the globe, photographing animals that most people would never see outside of a documentary. He trusted his equipment more than he trusted people. After all, cameras didn't lie. They only captured what was truly there. That night, a gentle snow began to fall. its flakes drifting down slowly, blanketing the forest floor in a pristine layer of white. It was beautiful, but also eerie. Elias set up his tripod, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a master craftsman. He carefully adjusted the lens of his high-end digital camera and began recording a long, static shot of the snow-dusted trees. He wanted to capture the stillness, the stark contrast of the dark trunks against the white ground. He was alone, at least, that's what he believed. He had hiked 4 miles, seen no tracks other than his own, and heard nothing but the muffled whisper of the falling snow. When he finally returned to the warmth and safety of his home, he couldn't wait to review the footage. He made himself a cup of coffee and settled in front of his large monitor, ready to be mesmerized by the quiet majesty he had captured, but almost immediately, something felt wrong. At first, the video showed exactly what he remembered. Towering pine trees standing like ancient sentinels, snow drifting lazily through the air, and the deep, impenetrable darkness lurking between the trunks. It was perfect. Too perfect. He kept watching, his eyes scanning every inch of the frame. Then, he saw it. Movement. It was subtle. So subtle, he almost missed it. But it wasn't an animal. It was behind the spot where he had been standing. Figures began to emerge from the darkness between the trees. They weren't animals. They were human shapes, perfectly still, watching. A cold dread crept up his spine. He paused the video, his heart hammering against his ribs. Isumed in his mouse, trembling slightly. The figures had no clear faces, just pale, blurry shapes where features should have been. Smudges of light in the darkness. He took a deep breath, trying to rationalize it. Lens flare, a trick of the light. He was a professional. He knew his equipment. This wasn't a technical glitch. Every time he resumed the footage, the figures were closer, not in a fluid motion, but in a horrifying, jerky progression. It was like a macabre stop-motion film. Step by step, they advanced. Frame by frame, they closed the distance. They moved without disturbing the snow, without making a sound. One frame, they were behind a tree. The next, they were in front of it, inches closer to his camera. His breathing grew shallow. He felt trapped in his own home. The silence of his room suddenly echoing the menacing silence of the forest. Near the end of the recording, as the battery indicator on the camera's display started to flash, one of the figures moved differently. It didn't just step forward. It leaned, slowly, unnaturally, toward the camera lens, until its pale, featureless face filled the entire screen. And then, the impossible happened. It smiled. A wide, distorted grin that stretched across the blankness of its face. It wasn't a smile directed at Elias. The feeling that washed over him was certain and terrifying. It was smiling at whoever would watch the video next. Elias slammed his laptop shut, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He never uploaded the footage. He never showed it to anyone. He buried the file deep within his hard drive, hoping to forget what he had seen. But some things can't be forgotten, and some files can't be contained. The file still exists on that old hard drive. A digital ghost in the machine, and sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, the file size changes. It grows, just a little bit at a time. Because sometimes it records new faces. Maybe one of them is yours. Lucas was driving home late one winter night, taking a familiar forest road. Snow was coming down hard, making it tough to see. But he'd driven this route 100 times before. The curves and dips were etched into his memory. He felt a sense of comfort. The quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers lulling him into a relaxed state. The world outside his car was a blur of white and black, the skeletal arms of trees reaching out from the darkness. After about 10 minutes, his headlights caught a familiar wooden sign. Forest Road to 12 kilometers. Nothing unusual. He drove on, the hypnotic dance of snowflakes continuing outside his window. The tires crunched on the fresh layer of snow, the only sound besides his own breathing. He turned up the heat, the warm air a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside. Another 10 minutes crawled by, He was humming along to a song on the radio when something made him sit up straight. It was the sign again. Forest Road menos 12 kilometers. He blinked, thinking his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. It had to be a different sign, right? Maybe the counties put up multiple markers. But it looked identical. The same faded green paint. The same splintered corner. It slowed down, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He pulled out his phone and checked his GPS. The little blue dot showed him moving forward, steadily progressing along the road. The map didn't show any loops or detours. Shaking his head, he decided it was just fatigue. He pressed on the gas, eager to be home. Another 10 minutes, his knuckles were white on the steering wheel now. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the darkness, and then he saw it. The sign. Forest Road menos 12 kilometers. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't fatigue. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He was trapped. The same stretch of road, Aubert and Aubert. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. He thought about turning around, but a deeper, more primal fear told him that was a bad idea. He had to keep moving forward. This time, as he approached the sign, he noticed something new, something that definitely wasn't there before. Pulled over on the shoulder, half buried in the accumulating snow, was a car. His breath caught in his throat. It was his car. Not just the same model, but identical in every way. A dark blue sedan. He could see the small dent on the rear bumper from where he de-backed into a post last year. The same university sticker was peeling off the back window. His blood ran cold. He slowed to a crawl, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. His hands trembled. He leaned forward, squinting through the falling snow to see inside the parked vehicle. There was someone in the driver's seat, a man slumped over the steering wheel. Motionless, as Lucas drew alongside, his headlights illuminated the figure's face. A scream tore from his throat, raw and desperate. The man in the car. It was him. An exact copy. Same jacket, same haircut, same horrified expression frozen on his face. But his eyes were glassy, lifeless, dead. Pure, unadulterated terror seized him. He didn't think. He just reacted. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as the tires spun wildly on the snow before finding purchase. He shot forward, leaving the horrific scene behind him. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. Ejustrave, his foot glued to the floor, his eyes wide with fear. The road kept going. He didn't pass the sign again. The loop was broken. But as minutes turned into an hour, and then another, a new, more dreadful realization dawned on him. The road wasn't repeating anymore, but it wasn't leading him out of the forest either. The trees grew thicker, the darkness deeper. His GPS had gone dark, the screen showing nothing but a blank map. It was lost. The road stretched on endlessly before him, pulling him deeper and deeper into the heart of the woods, with no end in sight. He was still driving, but he wasn't going home. He was just going Hawaii. Have you ever stood on the edge of a frozen lake and felt that deep, primal silence? The kind of quiet that feels ancient, almost sacred. In the heart of a forgotten forest, there was a lake just like that, a perfect silver mirror under the winter moon. It was utterly still, utterly silent, until the knocking started. It began subtly, a faint tapping, almost lost in the whisper of the wind through the pines. Locals would pause, straining their ears, in the cold night air. Tap, tap, tapepa soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Just the ice expanding and contracting, they told themselves. A natural sound. Nothing to worry about. But the sound didn't stop. It grew more insistent. Night after night, the knocking returned. Louder each time. It wasn't random anymore. The taps started forming patterns, like a code being drummed out from the deep. Morse code. Some wondered. A desperate message. The rhythm was hypnotic, pulling people from their warm beds to the edge of the ice, their breath fogging in the frigid air. They'd stand there, mesmerized, listening to the impossible drumming from below. Then, one evening, it changed. The patterns gave way to something far more chilling. Voices, faint whispers that seemed to rise from the ice itself. They weren't just random sounds, they were specific. People heard their own names being called. A soft, pleading whisper of Sarah, ... carried on the wind, making a young woman's blood run cold. An old man heard the voice of his wife, who had passed years ago, murmuring his name, Thomas ... come find me. The village was gripped by a quiet terror. Sleep became a luxury few could afford. The sounds from the lake were a constant, tormenting presence. Was it a trick of the mind? A collective delusion brought on by the isolation of the deep woods? Or was something truly down there, trapped beneath that thick sheet of ice, calling out to them? The polite knocking had become a personal, terrifying invitation. The fear was palpable, a heavy blanket over the small community. But fear, when pushed far enough, can curdle into a desperate kind of courage. They couldn't live like this, haunted by whispers from the ice. A decision was made. They had to know. They had to see what was making those sounds. One moonless night, a group of the bravest, or perhaps most desperate, villagers gathered at the shore. They carried heavy axes and iron pikes, their faces grim and set. The air was thick with tension. The only sound the crunch of their boots on the snow and the faint, rhythmic knocking that seemed to beckon them forward. They walked to the center of the lake, to the very spot where the sounds were loudest. The first axe swung, the sharp crack echoing across the silent forest like a gunshot. The ice was thick, unnaturally so. They hacked at it for what felt like hours, their arms aching, their breath coming in ragged bursts. With every swing, the knocking from below seemed to get more frantic, more excited, as if it knew they were coming. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of familiar names swirling around them in the dark. Finally, with a loud groan, a huge section of ice gave way. It didn't splash. It just fell. The villagers peered over the edge of the hole they had created, their lanterns held high, expecting to see the dark, frigid water of the lake. But there was no water. There was no reflection from their lights. There was only darkness, an absolute, endless blackness that seemed to swallow the light hole. It was a void, a bottomless pit that stretched down into nothingness, right there, beneath the surface of their familiar world. As they stared into that impossible abyss, a profound silence fell. The knocking had stopped. The whispers were gone. There was nothing. Just the cold, the dark, and the terrifying emptiness where a lake should have been. They backed away slowly, their minds reeling, unable to process what they had seen. They returned to their homes, but they were changed. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the knocking had ever been. That winter passed, and spring arrived. The snow melted, the trees budded, but the lake never froze again. Not the next winter, or the winter after that. Even on the most bitter, freezing nights, when the rest of the forest was encased in ice, that patch of water remained stubbornly, unnaturally liquid, a dark, still eye in the center of the woods. The knocking never returned, but sometimes, on a quiet night, people say you can still hear the whispers, not from the water, but from the darkness of the woods surrounding it, as if whatever was trapped is now free, and it's still calling their names. Imagine trekking through a dense, snow-covered forest. The silence is absolute, broken only by the crunch of your boots on the frozen ground. It's in this profound quiet that you spot it, a dark shape, half buried in a drift of pristine white snow. You brush away the frost, and your fingers touch something cold and smooth. It's a book, a journal, bound in a strange, pale leather. The texture is uncanny, almost like human skin, but impossibly smooth. There's no title, no markings, just the unsettling feel of it in your gloved hands. Driven by a curiosity that overrides your unease, you decide to take it with you. Back in the warmth of your isolated cabin, with a fire crackling in the hearth, you finally open the journal. The pages are yellowed with age, filled with elegant, spidery handwriting. The ink is faded, but the words are chillingly clear. Each entry begins with a name and a date. You read the first one. Elias Vance, November 12th, 1887. The entry describes Elias, a young trapper with eyes as gray as the winter sky, venturing into this very forest in search of game. The writer details his confidence, the way he laughed at tales of the woods being haunted. The entry ends abruptly, with 4 simple, terrifying words. The forest remembers. You turn the page. Clara May, June 3rd, 1924. Clara was a botanist, fascinated by the unique flora of the region. She came seeking a rare orchid said to bloom only under the oldest pines. The journal describes the vibrant red of her scarf against the green of the summer foliage. It details her passion, her scientific mind, her dismissal of local superstitions, and then the same concluding phrase, the forest remembers. Page after page, it's the same. Dozens of names, dozens of stories spanning over a century. A lost child from 1956, a group of hikers from 1982, a photographer who came to capture the autumn colors in 2001. Each person is described in vivid, intimate detail, their hopes, their fears, their reasons for entering the woods. The writer knew them. It seems, knew their last thoughts, the final expression on their faces. And for every single one, the story concludes with that same haunting sentence. They all walked into the forest, and they never walked out. The journal is a ledger of the lost, a testament to the wood's insatiable memory. A cold dread begins to seep into you, a chill that has nothing to do with the winter outside. Who wrote this? How could they know so much? The detail is what's most unnerving. It's not just a list of the missing. It's a collection of intimate eulogies. It describes the worn patch on a hiker's backpack, the nervous way a young man would bite his lip, the song a little girl was humming to herself. These aren't just entries. They are final moments, captured with an impossible, all-seeing clarity. You start to feel watched. The familiar comfort of your cabin dissolves. The shadows in the corners seem to lengthen and deepen. Every creak of the old wood sounds like a footstep. You glance at the window, half expectant to see a face peering in from the darkness. But there's only your own pale reflection staring back. You feel a desperate urge to throw the book into the fire, to watch the sinister pages turn to ash. But you can't. An unseen force holds you captive, compelling you to read on, to see it through to the end. With a trembling hand, you flip through the remaining pages. The entries become more recent. 1995 and 2008 and 2017. The handwriting remains unchanged. A constant, patient script chronicling decade after decade of disappearance. You reach the last written entry. It's from just last year. A young woman, a poet, who came to the forest seeking inspiration. The journal describes her sitting on the very same fallen log you passed on your way here, writing in her own notebook. Her story ends like all the others. The forest remembers. After that, there's only one page left. One final, blank, empty page at the very end of the book. The emptiness feels like a held breath, a pause in a story that isn't finished. It feels like an invitation, a space waiting to be filled. The silence in the cabin is deafening now. The fire has died down to glowing embers, and the room has grown cold. You close the journal, the smooth leather cool against your skin. You can't shake the feeling that the book isn't just a record of the past, but a prophecy for the future. You try to rationalize it. It's just an elaborate, morbid prank. Someone with a twisted sense of humor must have left it in the snow for an unsuspecting person like you to find. You try to laugh it off, but the sound catches in your throat. You place the journal on your bedside table, determined to forget about it, to get a good night's sleep and deal with it in the morning. Maybe you'll take it to the authorities. Maybe you'll just leave it where you found it. Sleep, however, does not come easy. You toss and turn, the words from the journal echoing in your mind. The forest remembers. The names, the faces you've conjured from the descriptions, they parade through your thoughts. You dream of ancient trees with bark-like wrinkled skin, their branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. You dream of whispers on the wind, carrying the names of the lost. You wake with a start, the first light of dawn filtering weakly through the window. The cabin is freezing. For a moment, you feel a sense of relief. It was just a nightmare. But then your eyes fall on the journal, still sitting on your bedside table. Something is different. You sit up, your heart pounding in your chest. Yesterday, you were certain you'd closed it. Now, it's open. Open to the last page. The page that was blank. It isn't blank anymore. New ink, stark and black, against the yellowed paper, glistens as if freshly written. The handwriting is the same elegant, spidery script. A new entry has appeared overnight. It begins with today's date. Then, it continues with a name. Your name. The entry describes a person, weary from a long trek, finding a strange leather-bound journal in the snow. It describes their curiosity, their growing horror as they read the stories within. It describes the way you looked in the reflection of the dark window, your face pale with fear. It describes your restless sleep, your nightmares of the whispering woods. It knows everything. It knows you. You stare at the page, your breath caught in your throat, your blood turning to ice. You'll read your own story, your own final moments being chronicled before they've even happened. And you know, with a certainty that steals the air from your lungs, how this entry, your entry, is going to end. You can't bring yourself to look, but you know what words are waiting for you at the bottom of the page. You can almost hear them whispered on the cold morning air, a promise carried by the ancient, patient woods outside your window. The forest remembers. The first time Elias noticed it, the sun was a bleeding orange wound on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and dying light. It was dusk, that liminal hour when the world holds its breath, caught between day and night. He was walking home along his usual path, a quiet suburban street lined with slumbering houses and skeletal trees. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Everything was normal, mundane even, until he saw his shadow. It stretched long and thin before him, a familiar silhouette cast by the last vestiges of sunlight. But something was wrong. Utterly, fundamentally wrong. He stopped, his feet suddenly cemented to the pavement. He hadn't meant to stop, but the sight had frozen him. His shadow, however, did not stop. It took another step, a single, fluid, impossible step forward, while he remained perfectly still. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence. He blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light, an optical illusion born from fatigue. He shook his head, a small, nervous gesture. He was just tired. That had to be it. He forced himself to take another step, and then another, his eyes glued to the dark figure on the ground. For a moment, it seemed to be behaving. It matched his pace, mimicked his stride. The knot in his stomach loosened just a fraction. He was being ridiculous. Shadows don't have a will of their own. They are mere absences of light, bound to the objects that cast them. He picked up his pace, trying to walk off the unease, to outrun the nonsensical fear creeping up his spine. The rhythmic scuff of his shoes on the concrete was a comforting, solid sound. Left, right, left, right. His shadow followed. Left, right, left, right. Good. Normal. Then, just as he was convincing himself it was all in his head, it happened again. He lifted his right foot to step onto the curb, but his shadow lifted its left, a mirror image, but reversed, defiant. A cold dread, sharp and icy, pierced through him. This was not a trick of the light. Tease was real. He stopped again, dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. He held perfectly still, a statue of a man under a darkening sky. 1 second pass. 2, 3. His shadow kept walking. It glided forward, detaching from his feet, moving with a grace he himself did not possess. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. It moved ahead. A free entity panic seized him, espionado on the primal scream building in his chest, ready to shatter the evening quiet. He needed to run, to get away, to escape this thing that wore his shape. As he turned, his shadow turned with him. It wasn't stretched out on the ground anymore. It was standing upright. A three-dimensional silhouette of pure, featureless blackness, darker than the deepest night. And it was facing him. Where its face should have been, a gash of impossible white appeared, stretching into a wide, silent smile. The smile was not friendly. It was a predator's smile, full of knowing and ancient hunger. From that day on, the world changed for Elias. Or rather, his world shrank. He locked himself in his house, drawing every curtain, blocking every sliver of light. He lived in a self-imposed darkness, terrified of casting the shadow that was no longer his. During the day, he'd huddle in the darkest corner of his basement, listening to the sounds of the world outside. He could hear the mailman, the distant laughter of children, the drone of a lawnmower. Normal life, a life he was now barred from. At night, he would sometimes dare to peek through a tiny crack in the blinds, and he would see it. His shadow, out there, living his life. He saw it walk down the street, its stride confident and easy. He saw it wave to his neighbors, who would smile and wave back, completely oblivious. They saw Elias. They saw his form, his clothes, his walk. They didn't see the emptiness within. They didn't notice that the figure walking in the bright morning sun cast no shadow of its own. How could a shadow cast a shadow? It was absurd. It was impossible. It was happening. He watched as his shadow went to his job. He watched it sit in his favorite chair at the local cafe, a cup of coffee steaming in front of it. He watched it meet his friends for a drink. From his darkened window, he saw them laughing, clapping the shadow on the back. It mimicked his gestures, his mannerisms, his laugh. But Elias, the real Elias, could see the subtle differences. The way it tilted its head was just a little too sharp. The way it smiled never quite reached its eyes because it had no eyes. It was a perfect, terrifying puppet, and he was the broken marionette, hidden away, his strings cut. His food and supplies began to dwindle. Days blurred into a continuous twilight of fear. He grew thin, pale, a ghost in his own home. Loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in the gloom. He tried calling for help once. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling, and dialed 911. But when the operator answered, he couldn't speak. What would he say?
Hello, my shadow stole my life.
They would think he was insane. And maybe he was. Maybe this was all a grand, elaborate hallucination, the final fracture of a stressed mind. But then he would see it again, out the window, mowing his lawn, and the cold, hard reality would crash back in. One evening, desperation gnawed at him harder than ever. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had to do something. He decided to confront it, to reclaim his existence. Armed with the heaviest flashlight he could find, a flimsy weapon against a creature of darkness, he waited. He watched as his shadow came home. It walked up the path, pulled his keys from its pocket. His pocket hand unlocked the front door. The door creaked open. Elias flicked on the flashlight, sending a powerful beam into the hallway. "Get out!" he croaked, his voice raw from disuse. The beam hit the figure, and for a glorious second, nothing happened. It was just a man caught in a bright light. But then, the figure began to dissolve. Not in pain, but like smoke. It thinned, flattened, its edges bleeding into the surrounding darkness. It seeped backwards, pouring itself onto the floor, becoming what it truly was, a shadow. It slithered across the floorboards, a patch of living night, and flowed towards him. Elias stumbled back, his heart a frantic bird trapped in his chest. The beam of his flashlight wavered. The shadow reached his feet. He felt a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a deep, soul-sucking cold that seemed to leach the very life from his bones. It flowed up his legs, seamless and silent, merging with him. He screamed, a thin, hopeless sound swallowed by the darkness. He felt his own substance thinning, his weightless. His thoughts became fuzzy, distant echoes. His last coherent thought was of the sun, of its warmth on his skin. Then there was only the cold, and the silence, and the darkness. Elias was never seen again. Not the real one, anyway. No one filed a missing persons report. Why would they? Elias was right there. He went to work every day. He paid his bills. He chatted with his neighbors over the fence. He was a model citizen, a bit quieter than before, perhaps. A little more reserved. Some people noticed he'd lost his spark, that his eyes seemed vacant. But people change, they reasoned. Life wears you down. He still took his walks at dusk. Every evening, just as the sun began to set, he would walk along that same suburban street. His stride was confident, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention as he passed under a streetlight, you might notice something odd, something impossible. You would see the man walking briskly, but on the ground beside him, there was nothing. A man walking in the light, casting no shadow at all, and sometimes, just sometimes, as he turned a corner and the light hit him just right, you could almost see him smile. A wide, silent, predatory smile that held the cold of an empty, starless night. He was, after all, just a shadow of his former self. No, that's not quite right. He was the shadow, and he was finally free. Have you ever had a premonition, that gut feeling telling you something is about to happen? For Alex, it wasn't just a feeling, it was a message, delivered in the most bizarre way imaginable. It all started on a crisp January morning, the 11th, to be exact. Alex was on his usual hike, a routine he cherished, the crunch of snow under his boots. The stark beauty of the winter woods, it was his sanctuary. But today, something was different. Something was out of place, wedged tightly between the trunks of two ancient oak trees, almost as if they had grown around it, was a bottle. It wasn't an ordinary bottle. It was old, green, and caked with frost, so thick it looked like it had been there for a century. Curiosity, a powerful and sometimes dangerous force, took hold of Alex. He worked at the bottle, chipping away the ice with his gloved fingers, his breath clouding in the freezing air. It was stuck. Fast. He had to use the small multi-tool he always carried, prying and wiggling, until finally, with a soft crack of ice, it came free. He held it up to the weak winter light. Inside, something was rattling. A piece of paper, rolled up tightly, and sealed with a cork that had seen better days. His heart began to beat a little faster. A message in a bottle, here, in the middle of a landlocked forest. It felt like something out of a fairy tale. Back home, in the warmth of his kitchen, the bottle finally thawed. Water dripped onto the countertop as he carefully worked the cork out. The smell of damp earth and something else, something old and musty, escaped. With trembling hands, he tipped the bottle, and the small scroll of paper slid into his palm. He unrolled it carefully. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. 6 simple words that would change everything. Do not enter the forest on January 12th. Alex stared at the note, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. January 12th. That was tomorrow. It was a strange, unsettling coincidence. But then, his eyes fell to the handwriting. The looping T, the sharp F, the way the E curled at the end. He dropped the note on the table, as if it had burned him. He knew this handwriting. He knew it as well as he knew his own face. Because it was his. Sleep was impossible that night. Alex sat in his armchair, the note on the table beside him. A single lamp, casting long shadows across the room. How could this be? The handwriting was undeniably his own. He compared it to his driver's license. An old birthday card he'd written to his mum. It was a perfect match. But he had no memory of writing it. He certainly hadn't hiked to the woods, wedged a bottle between 2 trees, and left a warning for himself. The paper looked ancient. The bottle looked like it had been there for decades. Was it a prank? A very, very elaborate one. Who would know his handwriting so well? And why? The questions spiraled in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. A warning from the future. The idea was ludicrous. Something out of a science fiction movie. Time travel wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet, there was the note. physical proof of an impossible event. He tried to reason it away. Maybe someone had forged his handwriting. But the level of detail was uncanny, and the message itself. Do not enter the forest on January 12th. It was specific. It was a command. A plea. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Alex felt a strange resolve solidifying within him. Fear was warring with a more powerful emotion. Curiosity. What was in that forest? What was he being warned against? The paradox was maddening. If he heeded the warning and stayed home, he would never know what he was supposed to avoid. The what if would haunt him forever. But if went he'd be defying a message that seemingly came from his future self. A self who apparently knew something terrible was going to happen. He looked at the note again. The paper was so old. If he wrote this in the future, how far in the future? And how did it get back here? Frozen in time. Did something happen to him tomorrow that made him spend the rest of his life, or maybe just a single, desperate moment, trying to send this message back? The urge to understand, to solve the puzzle, became an obsession. He felt like a character in a story, and the only way to know the ending was to turn the page, even if the page warned you not to. By the time the sun was fully up, his decision was made. He couldn't live with the not knowing. He had to go. On the morning of January 12th, Alex stood at the edge of the forest. The air was still, heavy with unspoken tension. The sky was a blanket of gray, threatening more snow. He had his backpack, his usual gear, but today everything felt different. Every familiar sight was now tinged with a sense of foreboding. The path leading into the woods seemed darker, less welcoming. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. His own handwriting flashed in his mind. Do not enter. He took the first step, and then another. The crunch of his boots on the snow was the only sound. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling of small animals. Just a profound, listening silence. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for him. He walked for what felt like hours, his senses on high alert. He scanned the trees, the undergrowth, the sky. He was looking for. What? A bear! A hidden trap. Another person. A had no idea. The suspense was a physical weight on his shoulders. He found himself drawn, almost magnetically, back to the two oak trees where he'd found the bottle. He stood before them, running his hand over the rough bark where the bottle had been wedged. It was just an empty space now. He felt a pang of disappointment. Was that it? Had he come all this way for nothing? Was the whole thing just an elaborate, meaningless joke? He turned to leave, a bitter laugh rising in his throat. And that's when he saw it. Half buried in the snow, just a few feet from the base of the oaks, was a glint of green glass. His heart stopped. Ick knelt down, brushing the snow away with frantic hands. It was a bottle. An old, green bottle, identical to the one he'd found yesterday. His hands trembled as he picked it up. This one wasn't frozen. It looked new, clean. The cork was pushed in tightly. And inside was a small, rolled-up piece of paper. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it would say, but he had to be sure. With numb fingers, he uncorked the bottle and tipped the paper into his hand. A unrolled Italiano. The paper was fresh, crisp. The ink was dark and clear. It was his handwriting. The loops and curls perfectly matching the pen he had in his own pocket, and the message was the same. Do not enter the forest on January 12th. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He was standing in a loop, a temporal paradox of his own making. The note he found yesterday wasn't from a distant future. It was from him. Right now. Understood. The older note, the one that looked ancient, was this very note. Just later, he was the one who had to place it. Something was compelling him to complete the circle. But why? What was the point of a warning that, by its very existence, ensures the event happens? As he grappled with this mind-bending reality, he heard a sound, a soft crackle of static, seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air began to shimmer, just for a second, like heat haze on a summer road. And then he saw him. Across the clearing, standing partially behind a large pine tree, was a figure. It was a man, dressed in hiking gear identical to his own. The man looked older, his face etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, his hair grayer at the temples, but there was no mistaking who it was. He was looking at himself, an older version of himself. The older Alex looked not at him, but at the sky, his expression one of pure terror. He seemed to be shouting, but no sound reached the younger Alex. It was like watching a silent movie. Then the world seemed to bend, the trees warped, the light flickered, and a soundless pressure built in the air. The older Alex was suddenly thrown back against the pine tree, as if by an invisible force. He crumpled to the ground and then, in a blink of an eye, he was gone. Vanished. The clearing was empty again. The forest was silent. Alex stood frozen, the note still clutched in his hand. He understood now. The warning wasn't to prevent him from coming. It was a beacon. It was a marker, ensuring he would be in this exact spot, at this exact time, to witness whatever that was. And now, he had a choice. He was holding the fresh note and the empty bottle. He looked at the two oak trees. The space between them was waiting. He knew what he had to do. He had to complete the loop. He had to roll up the paper, place it in the bottle, and wedge it between the trees, where it would wait, freezing over through the years, until a younger version of himself found it. He was a prisoner of his own warning. By trying to warn himself, his future self had only succeeded in perpetuating the cycle, ensuring his younger self would always end up in this clearing, to witness the terrifying, unexplained event, and then set the trap all over again. He walked to the trees, his movements slow, robotic. He placed the note in the bottle and jammed it into the crevice. It was a perfect fit. He stepped back, his task complete. The loop was closed, but a new, terrifying question emerged. He had witnessed his future self vanish. He now had to live his life, knowing that one day he would return to this forest, older and wearier, to be the man who gets thrown against that tree and disappears. Was that his fate? To vanish into thin air? Or was there a way to break the cycle? He didn't know. All he knew was that he was now the man from tomorrow, carrying a terrible secret, forever bound to a single day in January. He turned and walked out of the forest, leaving the bottle behind, to wait. Have you ever felt it? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're alone in the woods. The feeling that you're not really alone. Most of us dismiss it. We tell ourselves it's just the wind, an animal rustling in the undergrowth, our minds playing tricks on us. But what if it's not? What if something is really out there, just beyond the reach of our campfire's light, watching? My grandfather used to tell me stories about the woods behind his old house. He wasn't a man given two flights of fancy. He was practical, grounded, a man who believed only in what he could see and touch. But when he spoke of the forest, a different kind of seriousness would settle over him. Never stare too long into the trees at night, Michael, he'd say, his voice low. You might see something you can't unsee. I was just a kid. I thought it was his way of scaring me into staying close to the house after dark. One wish I had listened. Years later, after he passed, I inherited that house. It was old, filled with memories, and backed right up against that same sprawling, ancient forest. One autumn evening, I decided to go camping. Not far, just a small clearing about 100 yards from the back porch. I wanted to feel connected to the place, to him. I built a small, crackling fire, the flames dancing and casting flickering shadows all around me. The night was still, unnervingly so. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the sound of the fire and my own breathing. As the hours passed, I found myself just staring into the darkness where the firelight couldn't reach. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, but I dismissed them as old folklore. That's when I saw the first one. It wasn't an animal's eye reflecting the light. There was no glint, no shine. It was just there. An eye. A human eye. Wide open, floating in the blackness between two thick oak trees. It was pale, the iris a washed-out blue, and it was looking directly at me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to reason with myself. A trick of the light? A strange fungus? But I couldn't look away. And as I stared, frozen, another one opened. To the left of the first, a bit higher up, this one was brown, dark, and intense. It blinked, slowly, deliberately. Then, another appeared. And another. Soon, the entire tree line was dotted with them. Dozens of floating, disembodied human eyes, all shapes and sizes, all colors. Some were young and clear, others old and cloudy. Some looked curious, some looked sad, and some looked hungry. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was the sheer impossibility of it all was crushing. The air grew cold, and the fire seemed to shrink, its warmth no match for the chilling presence surrounding me. They didn't move closer. They just hung there, suspended in the void between the trees, an audience of silent, unblinking spectators. The most terrifying part wasn't just seeing them, it was the feeling they projected. A deep, ancient intelligence, a patience that stretched beyond human comprehension. They weren't just looking, they were observing, studying, waiting. For what? I couldn't begin to imagine. Then, it happened. The one thing that shattered the last of my sanity. In perfect, horrifying synchrony, every single eye blinked at once. A silent, coordinated movement that rippled through the darkness. The sound was deafening in its absence. In that split second of total blackness, I felt a shift in the air. A pressure change, as if something immense had just exhaled all around me. When they opened again, they seemed closer, not physically, but their focus had intensified, become more personal, more invasive. It felt like they were looking past my eyes, directly into my thoughts, my memories, my fears. I don't know how I broke free. Some primal survival instinct must have kicked in. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, abandoning my tent, my fire, everything. I ran blindly towards the faint light of the house, not daring to look back. I could feel their collective gaze on my back, a physical weight pressing down on me, urging me to fall. I burst through the back door, slamming and locking it behind me, my body shaking uncontrollably. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, my mind a whirlwind of terror. I never went back into those woods at night. I eventually sold the house. I couldn't stand the way the trees seemed to lean in, the way the shadows at the edge of the yard seemed to hold shapes they shouldn't, but I can't escape them. Even now, years later, living in the middle of a bustling city, sometimes I wake up in the dead of night. I look towards my window, at the dark space between the buildings, and I'll see them. A pair of eyes floating in the darkness, watching me, waiting, and I know they'll always be there. If you stare long enough into any patch of darkness, you begin to notice them. Try it tonight. Just be careful what you invite in. The forest floor was a tapestry of decay and life, a damp carpet of fallen leaves and moss that muffled our every step. We were 5 hours into the search for a pair of missing hikers, swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness of Blackwood National Park. My name is Jake, and I'm a senior member of the county's search and rescue team. With me were my leader, Marcus, a man whose calm demeanor had pulled us through more crises than I can count, and 3 other seasoned pros, Liam, Chloe, and Ben. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth, so heavy you could almost taste it. A persistent drizzle had been falling since dawn, clinging to our gear and seeping into our bones. The sky was a uniform, gloomy gray, turning the late afternoon into a premature twilight. Visibility was getting worse, and the dense canopy of ancient trees blocked out what little light remained. Marcus called a halt near a gnarled oak tree that looked like a skeletal hand reaching for the sky. He pulled out the map, its plastic cover slick with rainwater. "All right, team, let's check in." "Anything?" We all shook our heads. No tracks, no broken branches, no dropped water bottles. It was as if the hikers had simply vanished into thin air. Ben, our communications guy, unclipped the radio from his vest. "Base, this is SAR 1. Status check, over." The radio hissed and crackled, the sound of static, a familiar yet unsettling companion in the deep woods. SAR 1, this is base. We read you. Any sign of the subjects? Over. Ben sighed. Negative. Base. We're at grid reference Foxtrot Niner. Conditions are deteriorating. We'll continue the sweep for another 30 minutes before heading back to rendezvous point. Over. Copy that. SAR 1. Stay safe. Basi out. Marcus nodded, folding the map. Okay, let's spread out a little. Estender formation. Keep your eyes peeled. They can't be too far, we fanned out, maintaining a visual on each other through the thick undergrowth. Marcus was at the center, a solid, reassuring presence. I was on his right flank. The only sounds were the drip of water from the leaves, the squelch of our boots in the mud, and our own steady breathing. The silence of the forest has a way of pressing in on you, making you feel small and insignificant. It's a silence that isn't empty. It feels watchful. That's when it happened. The radio on Ben's vest crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't bass. The static was harsher, punctuated by what sounded like faint, ragged breaths. We all froze, turning to look at Ben. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was weak, strained, and filled with a terror that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Help me ... please ... I'm lost. I can quote T ... double. Quotes the transmission cutout, replaced by a deafening squall of static. Chloe was the first to speak, her voice a hushed whisper. Was that one of them? Ben fumbled with the dials. Unknown signal. It's on our frequency, but the transmission is weak, distorted. He keyed the mic. Unidentified station. This is SAR 1. Please repeat your last transmission. What is your location? Oval? We waited, holding our breath. The radio remained stubbornly silent for a moment. Then the static returned, and with it, the voice. This time it was clearer, and a cold dread washed over me, so intense it felt like ice water flooding my veins. They're coming. I can't see them, but I can hear them. Please, you have to find me. The voice. I knew that voice. We all did, every single one of us. It was deep, authoritative, and laced with an unmistakable accent we heard every single day. It was Marcus's voice. I snapped my head towards him. He was standing not 10 feet away, his back to the gnarled oak tree. He was just as frozen as the rest of us, his face a mask of disbelief. His own radio was clipped to his shoulder, silent. He hadn't said a word. Liam's eyes were wide, darting from Marcus to the radio on Ben's chest and back again. What in the world? Marcus? Is that some kind of sick joke? Marcus just shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. My radio's off, he stated, his actual voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the panicked version we were hearing. He reached up and tapped his own device to prove it. Ben, looking pale, tried the radio again. This is SAR 1. Who is this? Identify yourself immediately. The only response was another blast of static, and then that terrible, familiar voice, laced with a new, frantic edge. They're getting closer. Oh God, the trees. The trees have eyes. The voice broke into a choked sob. It's Marcus Thorne. I'm the team leader. Please, is anyone there? My team? I can't find my team. We all stared at the real Marcus. He stood there, silent, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching in his cheek. He looked from face to face, his eyes searching ours for an explanation that none of us had. A flock of crows erupted from the canopy above, their caws shattering the tense silence. It felt like a terrible omen. Chloe took a half step back, her hand reaching for the emergency beacon on her pack. This isn't possible. It's a recording. It has to be. Someone's messing with us. With my voice? Marcus asked, his tone dangerously low. From where? The signal is weak. Local? There's no one else for miles. The voice on the radio started again, And this time it was a scream. A raw, guttural scream of pure agony and terror that seemed to go on forever before being abruptly cut off by static. We all flinched. The sound echoed in the oppressive silence of the forest, long after it had stopped. Ben ripped the radio off his vest, holding it like it was a venomous snake. "I'm shutting it off." "No," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through our fear. "Leave it on. We need to know what's going on." He looked shaken, but he was still our leader. He took a deep breath, forcing composure back into his features. "It's a trick, a distraction. Maybe from the hikers themselves. Maybe they're delirious. Using a voice modulator? We don't know, but we're not going to panic." As if on cue, the radio crackled again. The voice was different now. It was no longer panicked. It was cold, flat, and chillingly calm. It was still Marcus's voice, but all the humanity had been stripped from it. "I found them," it said. "They weren't lost. They were just hiding. But you can't hide from the forest." A long, drawn-out pause filled with static. "Now ... Where are the rest of you?" A twig snapped behind me. We all spun around. Flashlights cutting bright, panicked arcs through the gloom. There was nothing there but dense, dark woods. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. A physical pressure on the back of my neck. Ben was trembling. "Marcus, we have to get out of here. Now. Forget the hikers, TICs, WE. All of this is wrong." The real Marcus stared into the impenetrable darkness, his face grim. He finally seemed to agree. "Okay. Everyone, stick close. We're heading back to the rendezvous point. Single file, no stopping for anything. Ben, kill the radio." Ben didn't need to be told twice. He fumbled with a switch, and the device finally went silent. The sudden absence of the static was almost as unnerving as the voice had been. The forest's natural sounds rushed back in, but they no longer felt peaceful. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a night bird sounded like a threat. We moved quickly and quietly, our training kicking in, despite the fear gnawing at us. Marcus took the lead. I was right behind him, with Chloe, Liam, and Ben following. We moved as a tight unit, our flashlights carving a small bubble of safety in the suffocating darkness. But the forest wasn't done with us. As we navigated a particularly dense patch of ferns, a sound drifted through the trees. It wasn't from the radio this time. It was coming from the woods around us, seeming to echo from all directions at once. It was a soft, distorted whisper, and it was calling our names. Jake. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It sounded like it was whispered right next to my ear. Chloe, ... Don't run. ... Double quotes. Chloe let out a small, terrified gasp and pressed closer to me. The whispers came from the left, then the right, then from high up in the canopy. They were warped and unnatural, mimicking Marcus's voice in a grotesque parody. It was a psychological assault, designed to break us to separate USA. Liam, ... I see you, ... Ben. Why did you turn off the radio? I was trying to help you, ... Marcus stopped, raising a hand. Don't listen, he yelled, his real voice a defiant roar against the insidious whispers. It's a trick of the wind. Sound carries strangely in these woods. Keep moving. But his own voice, the fake one, answered from the darkness. It's no trick, Marcus. You brought them here. You led them right to us. We started running. All semblance of formation and professionalism was gone. We were just 5 terrified people fleeing from something we couldn't see and couldn't understand. Branches whipped at our faces. Thorns tore at our clothes. Ben stumbled and fell, and Liam and I had to haul him back to his feet. The whispers followed us, a relentless, mocking chorus. We finally burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel path, leading to our rendezvous point, the team's truck. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. We scrambled inside, slamming and locking the doors, gasping for breath, hearts hammering against our ribs. For a long moment, we just sat there in the truck's cab, the engine off, enveloped in a fragile silence. Safe, or so we thought, Marcus was trying to get his breathing under control. Everyone, ... Everyone okay? He managed to ask between breaths. We all nodded, still too shaken to speak. He reached for the truck's radio to call base, to report. What? What could we possibly report? That the forest was haunted? That it had stolen his voice? As his hand touched the dial, the static started before he even turned it on. It came through the truck's speakers, low at first, then growing louder. And then the voice came, not panicked, not cold, but filled with a horrifying, triumphant glee. It was Marcus's voice, clear as day, as if he were sitting right there with us. "Found you," it said, and from the seat next to me, the real Marcus, the man I had followed and trusted for years, slowly turned his head. "Et looked at me." But his eyes were empty, flat, and utterly devoid of recognition, and a slow, terrible smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't belong there. The whispers hadn't just been in the woods, one had gotten in. In the deepest, oldest part of the Blackwood Forest, where the trees grow so thick they blot out the sun, there stands a single, solitary grave. It's not part of any cemetery. It's just there. A slab of gray stone, weathered by countless seasons, jutting out from the earth like a broken tooth. There's no name on it. No date of birth, no date of death. Just an unnerving, empty space where a name should be. The locals know the stories. They warn their children, and they warn any curious travelers who stray too far from the beaten path. Don't go looking for the nameless grave, they say, their voices hushed, and if you find it, whatever you do, don't speak. The legend is simple and terrifyingly precise. If you stand before that empty tombstone and read the nothingness aloud, you speak the absence of a name into the cold. Silent ere you will disappear. Vanish without a trace, no struggle, no scream, just gone. And the next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierce through the dense canopy, a new name will appear on the stone, perfectly carved, as if it had been there all along. The story goes that it began with a traveler, a man named Elias Thorne. He was a cartographer, a man of logic and reason, who scoffed at local superstitions. He heard the whispers about the nameless grave, and saw it as a challenge, a local myth to debunk. He ventured into Blackwood, compass in hand, determined to prove them all wrong. He found the grave easily enough. Just as described, a cold, lonely stone, surrounded by a perpetual quiet. The air was still, heavy. Even the birds seemed to avoid this part of the forest. Elias stood before it, a smirk on his face. He took a deep breath, and with a voice full of theatrical mockery, he announced to the silent woods, "Here lies nobody." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that was immediately swallowed by the trees. He waited. Nothing happened. The wind didn't howl. The ground didn't shake. He felt a bit foolish, but also vindicated. He turned to leave, ready to go back to the village inn and boast about his bravery. But as he took his first step away, a strange dizziness washed over him. The world seemed to tilt, the trees blurring into a swirl of green and brown. He felt a peculiar lightness, as if his feet were no longer touching the ground. He tried to call out, but no sound came. It was as if his voice had been stolen. The forest faded to black. The next morning, a group of village children, daring each other to go near the edge of the woods, saw something glinting in the morning sun. It was the tombstone, but it wasn't empty anymore. Carved into the stone, in crisp, clear letters, was the name Elias Thorne. Of course, Elias was just the first recorded case. The villagers say the grave has been claiming names for centuries. They speak of a young woman named Clara, who went looking for her lost brother. Convinced he had fallen victim to the grave's curse, she found the stone, bearing his name, and in her grief, she screamed at it. "Who are you to take him?" Who has no name. The next day, her own name, Clara, was etched neatly below her brother's. The stone, it seems, doesn't just take those who mock it. It takes those who acknowledge its emptiness. The list of names grew. It became a grim, vertical ledger of the lost. Each name was a story of someone who was too curious, too brave, or too heartbroken. The stone itself is a mystery. Some say it's a prison for a forgotten, ancient entity, a being that feeds on identity. It has no name of its own, so it steals the names of others to feel whole, to exist. With each name it carves, it anchors itself more firmly to our world, while the person whose name is taken fades from reality, their existence erased, their memories slowly dissolving from the minds of those who knew them. Years passed, and the grave became a thing of dark fascination for people outside the village. A group of paranormal investigators, with all their fancy equipment, TMF meters, thermal cameras, spirit boxes, decided to make the nameless grave their next big case. Their leader, a man named Ben Carter, was a skeptic at heart, always looking for the logical explanation. He believed it was a local prank, a cleverly executed hoax. The team set up their gear around the clearing. The sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows. The air grew cold, and their equipment started acting erratically. Batteries drained in seconds. The spirit box crackled with static, but no coherent words came through. Ben, growing frustrated, decided to force the issue. He stood before the stone, camera rolling, and spoke directly to it. "All right, if there's anything here, show yourself. Why is there no name on this stone?" He wasn't mocking it. He was questioning it. His team members begged him to stop, but he was fixated. It felt a pull, an invisible force, tugging at him. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. A sudden gust of wind extinguished their lanterns, plunging the clearing into absolute darkness. The team scrambled, shouting Ben's name. When they finally got their flashlights working again, he was gone. All that was left was his camera, lying on the ground, still recording. The next morning, the villagers who went to check found a new name on the stone: Ben Carter. When the police recovered the camera, the last few seconds of the footage were corrupted, but the audio was crystal clear. It was Ben's whisper, "Who are you?" followed by a sound that wasn't static. It was the faint, chilling sound of stone grinding against stone. This leads us to the most recent story, the one that has sealed the forest off for good. A young historian named Dr. Alistair Finch became obsessed with the grave. He believed it wasn't a supernatural curse, but a historical marker, its secret hidden in plain sight. He spent years researching local archives, land deeds, and forgotten folklore. He had a theory. He believed the grave didn't belong to a person, but to a concept. He thought the original person buried there was a nameless god of silence and oblivion, and the act of speaking its lack of name was a form of sacrilege. He was convinced he could break the curse by giving the grave a name, the right name. He traveled to Blackwood Forest, not with cameras, but with old books and a set of carving tools. He found the stone, now covered with dozens of names. He knelt before it, and ignoring the litany of the lost, he began to speak. He didn't read the emptiness. Instead, he spoke a long-dead language, reciting what he believed was the true name of the entity bound to the stone. He wanted to placate it, to name it, and thus control it. According to a lone hiker who saw him from a distance, as Alistair spoke the final syllable of the ancient name, the ground began to tremble. The names on the stone started to glow with a faint, sickly light. Alistair didn't vanish. Instead, the stone itself seemed to liquefy, to ripple like dark water. Tendrils of shadow shot out from the grave and wrapped around him, pulling him not away, but down into the earth beneath the stone. The hiker fled in terror. When the authorities arrived, the scene was bizarre. Dr. Finch was gone. His tools were scattered. And the tombstone, it was different. All the names that had been carved into it over the centuries were gone. The stone was completely blank once more, smooth, gray, and unnervingly empty. As if it had been wiped clean, as if it were hungry again, patiently waiting in the deep, silent woods, waiting for the next person, curious enough, or foolish enough, to stand before a grave with no name and speak. So, what do you think? Is it a curse, a gateway, or something else entirely? The forest is quiet now, and the grave is waiting. It's a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved, and some names are best left unspoken. Do you ever get that feeling? The one where you're sure you've heard a story before, but you can't quite place it. A familiar chill, a detail that echoes in the back of your mind. We've been sharing these tales for a while now. Stories of strange disappearances, unsettling encounters, things that go bump in the night. We thought they were just that, stories. Isolated incidents. Tragic? Yes. Unexplained? Certainly. But separate, we were wrong. So wrong. We started noticing the patterns by accident. A name mentioned in one account, a specific type of tree described in another. A landmark, a twisted oak, a strangely shaped boulder popping up again and again. At first, we dismissed it as coincidence. The human mind loves to find patterns, right? But the connections kept multiplying, weaving a web that was impossible to ignore. A story from the 1970s about a group of lost hikers described the exact same cluster of white birch trees mentioned in a tale from 2003 about a lone camper who vanished. A report from the 1950s about a strange, rhythmic tapping sound heard in the woods was identical to what a family reported just last year. Generations apart, the common thread wasn't a creature. It wasn't a ghost or a monster in the traditional sense. It was the place. Every single one of these events, spanning decades, even a century, all happened in the same forest. We've been talking about the same woods all along, without even realizing it. Different years, different people, different winters, but always the same, ancient, sprawling wilderness. We had thought something was hunting in that forest, but the truth is far more terrifying. The forest isn't hunting. The forest remembers. Think about it. A forest is a living thing, a single, vast organism connected by a network of roots spreading 4 miles beneath the soil. It sees the seasons change, watches generations of animals live and die. It feels every footstep on its soil, hears every word whispered beneath its canopy. What if, over centuries, it developed a consciousness of its own? A slow, ancient, alien mind. It doesn't have eyes, but it sees. It doesn't have ears, but it hears. And it doesn't forget. Each story, each disappearance, each moment of terror, it's not a hunt. It's an imprint, a memory burned into the very wood and leaves. When a lone hiker gets lost in a blizzard, the forest doesn't just watch. It absorbs the experience. It remembers the biting cold, the howling wind, the feeling of utter hopelessness. It learns the shape of that person's fear. When a child wanders away from a campsite, drawn in by a strange light, the forest remembers the sound of their small, panicked breaths and the last thing they saw. These aren't just events that happened within the forest. They've become a part of the forest. The stories aren't just warnings. They are echoes. The forest is replaying its memories, the strange whispers on the wind. That's the voice of someone who called for help decades ago. Their plea now a permanent part of the forest's symphony. The feeling of being watched. That's the memory of 100 pairs of eyes, all staring into the darkness, just before they vanished. The forest isn't malicious. It doesn't have motives as we understand them. It simply is, and it remembers everything that happens within its borders. It's like a vast, organic library of fear, and every now and then it opens a book and reads it aloud. The people who vanished weren't just taken. They were recorded, archived. Their last moments, their deepest anxieties, their final thoughts, they are now data points in the forest's immense memory. They became part of the story. The forest learned their names, their fears, their very essence, and by learning, it grows. Its understanding of us deepens with every soul it catalogs. It's not trying to scare us. It's simply sharing what it knows. It's reenacting its memories through the sounds, the sights, the feelings that it projects onto those who wander into its domain. The problem is, to be the subject of one of its memories is to be lost forever. And this brings us to the most unsettling part of this realization. For all this time, we have been collecting these stories, piecing them together, sharing them. We've been telling you about the strange occurrences, the unexplained phenomena, the people who went into those woods and never came out. We have been broadcasting the forest's memories to anyone who would listen. And you have been listening. You've heard the names. You've pictured the gnarled trees, the endless snow. You have let these stories into your mind. The forest doesn't just remember those who walk on its soil. It remembers those who learn its secrets. By listening to these tales, you've formed a connection. You've acknowledged its existence, given it a space in your thoughts. The whispers of the lost, the chill of the eternal winter, the suffocating presence of the ancient trees, they are no longer just words in a story for you. They are ideas. They are seeds. And the forest knows you've planted them. It doesn't need you to visit. The connection has already been made. Through these stories, it has reached out from its cold, silent depths, and it has found you. It now knows who you are. The forest knows you. So, tonight, when you're lying in bed and the house is quiet, if you hear something outside your window, a faint tapping, like a branch against the glass, or a soft whisper that sounds almost like your name carried on the wind, don't be curious. Don't try to see what it is. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't answer, because it might just be the forest, replaying one of its favorite memories, and it's wondering if you'd like to become a part of its next story. And, as our story fades into the night, I hope the shadows felt gentle and the silence kind. If your eyes are feeling heavy, let them close. Let the echoes of this tale drift quietly away with your thoughts. If you've found comfort here tonight, you're always welcome to return. New stories will be waiting for you just beyond the dark. Feel free to like the video or subscribe if this space brings you peace, but only when it feels right for you. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply, and remember, even in the quiet darkness, you are never alone.